Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of the Perform Happy podcast. My guest today has got so many amazing stories from her elite gymnastics career as a national team member for the US. She has won amazing awards, including she's an Emmy-winning broadcaster. She's an executive. She's a best-selling author. She's a keynote speaker. She's a mom on top of all of that. So welcome to the show, Nina Sossamon Pogue. I'm so happy to have you.
Rebecca, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So, okay. Anybody who's got the experience of an elite gymnast um, tells me that we've got something we could talk about. Also, being a mom, I'm like, those
Yeah,
are probably the two hardest sports out there, parenting and gymnastics.
by far. Yes.
Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit about your sport journey? I know that you're passionate about resilience. So, I don't think there's any gymnast out there that makes it to the elite stage without some adversity and
Yeah.
overcoming. So, how did your gymnastics career kind of set you up for this trajectory of resilience training?
Yeah, and as an executive, very much later in my life, I would always say, hire an athlete because you have no idea what all they've been through. So my journey, I was a gymnast down in Florida. My dad was in the Navy, so I did gymnastics wherever we moved to. And then I got to where I needed to really buckle down and be good because I was good at it. And so I moved away from home when I was 13 into what was an Olympic training center outside of DC. I was at MG Gymnastics. It's no longer around, with Greg Weiss, way back in the day. And I lived there and trained there. And I was there, and my parents had just enough money for me to go for a little while. So if I made the US team, there was some other ways to fund it. So they said, if you make the US team, you can stay. So a little pressure to make the team. But I did. I made elites at 14, I think I was, and then was on the US team way back in the day. My first USA, I love to say this, my first USA championships that I went to, I won, well, no, Mary Lou Retton won the all around, and I won Miss Congeniality. So that's how long ago it was. It was in the 80s. And so I trained, and I got to do some traveling. I went to, Japan, Hungary, Germany, Australia with the US team, got to wear the US sweats and be a part of that world, which was just magical. But then I didn't make the team in 84. So like a lot of your listeners, I was a high school athlete. All my friends knew I was a gymnast. I was, 4 foot nothing and trained all day long and was not social because I was in the gym. So it was pretty obvious that was my sport. And I was known as that gymnast. Um, so it was difficult to, go back to my high school after not making it. I got to one of the qualifiers and bombed my qualifying meet. I fell off the bars. I, shorted a handstand and fell off the bars. And then I landed on my butt on my beam dismount. And it was a qualifier, and that was the end of it. It was not going to happen. It just had grown some that year. My focus wasn't great. Those high school years are tough when you're an athlete. And so I didn't make it. But there was that shame and blame and embarrassment of not making the team. Because back then, it wasn't on Instagram and everything like it is now, but it was how I was known, as how I identified. So to go back at the ripe old age of 16 and feel like my life was over, my life was ruined because I didn't make this team and I didn't become part of this world that I wanted to be a part of, was just devastating. I just felt like a loser. And
Well, it's so interesting today.
mhm.
I've interviewed at least 3 28-year-olds who are going to the Olympics as
I
gymnasts.
know, right? I love
And
that.
and so even just today, a 16-year-old would be like, "Okay, let's try again." Whereas back in the 80s, it's like, "Sorry, you've peaked. Nobody
Yes,
beyond the age of 16 has any potential," which is
100%.
just insane because imagine if you had finished growing and finished putting on muscle mass and really got a feel for your body. I mean, a longer gymnastics career can be so much more successful. That's my little side note, but
Yeah,
thank
but
goodness
that's
we've evolved.
fascinating. Yes, thank goodness we've evolved because there was no afterwards. And you could go do college gymnastics, which isn't what it, wasn't what it is today. Luckily, it was beginning that. So I did regroup. If I wanted to go to college, I was going to have to get a scholarship. So I ended up regrouping and going to LSU, which just won the national championships.
Little school named LSU.
So I competed for LSU, and I, found my love for the sport again. I was back into it. It was a fabulous time, and to be among other elite athletes in all the different sports. It's just cool to step into that space. Now you're around a lot of like-minded people, not like when you're in high school and stuff. Like you step into a world where you're training with other athletes, training at a high level, and I loved that. But not long after I was there, my freshman year, halfway through the season, I did a beam dismount and blew out my knee. And it was career-ending injury for me. I'd had quite a few knee injuries leading up to it. And so I had to figure out who I was without my sport altogether, which once again, very low moment for me. I already had felt like my life was over, shame, blame, embarrassment. And then this happened and I just didn't know who I was. It was definitely my identity as being a gymnast since I was 4.5, 5 years old. It's what I knew. Back then, it was your bumper sticker. It was your sweatshirt, that kind of thing. Today, it's your Instagram and it's your TikTok and your social media, and you're really out there. So that pain of losing it and trying to figure out who you are without it is what I call public pain. It's what I talk about a lot these days. Very public failure. It's a very public failure when I didn't make the team, a very public failure when I blew out my knee. I actually, when I'm speaking on stage, I use this great visual. It's an old newspaper article from the Reveille, which was it still is the college paper at LSU. And it's me laying on the mat with my trainer and one of the paramedics kind of holding me down. And I'm holding my leg. And I'm sure I yelled some expletives that were horrible because it was in competition. It was in competition when I blew it out. So they have a shot of me being held down on the mat, going grimacing. And it says under it, "Another one bites the dust." Like that was the headline because we'd had a lot of injuries that year.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was just embarrassing, and on top of not knowing who I was and trying to figure that out. And I would love to say I made a lot of great choices and got through that easily, but I didn't. I made a lot of poor choices and did not get through that easily. I can remember like taking my Percocet with a shot of Jaeger and grabbing my crutches and trying to get to PT, like just really not doing great. My chat, when I talk about this, sometimes I'll say, yeah, I kind of graduated in booze and beers, because I'd never done anything. I had never done anything but gymnastics. So I felt like I had some weird making up to do at the time.
I can totally relate to that. And I think that, I'd love to do an unofficial survey of former gymnasts of like, how much did you drink the year after?
Oh, you go
Because
off the rails.
we didn't have coping skills. I mean, I
Mhm.
went from being completely under the thumb, completely scheduled, managed entirely to sort of released to college. It was not pretty, Nina. I did not make good choices. I did not leave my freshman year of college with high self-esteem. I actually dropped out of college. A super smart kid, who
Yeah.
had every capability. I never was taught coping skills. I didn't know how to do feelings. I didn't know. I just knew like you get in the gym and you work. And if there's no gym, what do you do with these feelings? It was
Yes.
it was hard. And so I'm glad you own that because I try to own it too. Like I look at these kiddos that are so tightly wound and go like, we got to get some coping skills into these kids before we release them to UC Santa Cruz, it's like,
Yes. So I did. I think it's so important to have this discussion right now because there are great programs out there now. All of the college athletes have areas of mental health coaching and mental health support systems in place that were not there before. I was very fortunate that after, I went through physical therapy and stuff. To keep my scholarship back then, I had to work for the athletic department. And I ended up working in the laundry room because my coach was none too happy that I blew out my knee. But I ended up through a series of things. So I'm working in the laundry room and not washing beautiful little leotards and shorts and things. I'm washing like jock straps from the basketball and football team, like working in the laundry room. I sometimes say my claim to fame was almost I washed Shaquille O'Neal's jock strap. That might have been it. But I worked in the laundry room, and thank goodness, in that college setting with so many athletes, the laundry room was in a space at LSU then where I would switch everything out, crutch outside, and then sit kind of up against the wall in the sunshine while all the other athletes walked to practice. So I'd see everybody walking, and nobody really comes and chats with you because you're not allowed a whole lot of fun to be around, and you're sort of a reminder of what could happen. So it was just a really, you know, time of not just the shame and blame, but I was sad, but I put on a happy face and smiled and did my own thing. And this one uh, counselor, and he was education counselor. He was not a mental health counselor. We didn't have that then in the 80s. So he stopped one day and said, "How you doing?" And I said, "Great. Can't you tell? I love this. This is my favorite." And jokingly, joked with him. And then he started stopping by every day. And after a little while, got me thinking about what life could be like after gymnastics. And I had never thought about it. I had just never thought about anything but this sport that was, my whole life. And it was magic because once he did that, then it opened up a whole new world for me. And I found journalism. I fell in love with it. I worked for sports information for the school for a little bit, and then I switched and got my first job at a TV station, out at LSU. I went to WBRZ in Baton Rouge. So it was my first job, and I was telling the stories of all these athletes who were my friends, and it was just a great space for me to be in. And I fell in love with that. And we've talked about it. I have grown children, but I once told my son when he lost his sport, he was a baseball player, had Tommy John surgery, and tried to come back and couldn't. But I told him, I said, "You're going to choose something else to be great at, and you're going to be great at it." And it took, I didn't tell him that right away. It took a little while, but this, in not so many words, that's what the counsel was from this man who would stop and plop down next to me and chat every day, was, just choose something else to be great at. You're disciplined, you're smart, you did this sport, which is, for everybody listening, it's the hardest sport out there. You know it, and I know
I
it.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So you did this sport, you can do anything. Choose something else to be great at.
Mm.
And I think that is what has still instilled the most resilience in me, is I truly believe I can go be great at anything, which is why I did journalism, became a news anchor, won lots of awards, then got out and got into tech and took a company public and made millions of dollars. I just believe gymnastics was the ground, the foundation for the discipline and the courage to do anything.
Oh, okay. So this makes me think of these like 12-year-old level 7 gymnasts who I hear are stuck on a skill. They're afraid they can't go for it, or they're injured, or they're not on their timeline, or they're just afraid that they're not going to reach their goal, whatever that is in this moment, whether it's this skill, this routine, this level, this college. There's just so much anxiety around these big goals that these kids have. And I hear kids say, you know, if I don't get it, then what was the point? Was it even worth it? And I, of course, from my grown-up, fully developed brain perspective, can look and go, "Oh, sweetheart, like you're going to see all of the things that came from this at some point."
Mhm.
But I mean that life after gymnastics, you are still the person that has gotten up 1,000 times and tried again. You're the person who, when everyone else is looking for instant gratification, you're spending 9 months trying to catch a release, failing for 9 months before you catch that thing. I mean, that is something that, especially today with social media and with like, what was that guy's name? You ask your watch and it tells you immediately. We're back
Right.
for us. We're like, we just have to wait until somebody remembers, like we aren't going to know until somebody like, oh yeah, that's right. So for these kids that they don't require instant gratification for their sport, that's a part of your brain and your existence going forward that can make you totally exceptional. I mean,
Ex-
there's
Exceptional in
so much point. If you don't reach your goal, I didn't reach my goal. I quit gymnastics. I dropped out of school. Like I didn't reach a lot of goals. I was divorced by 22, and I have a life that I am so beyond thrilled to live today. Like it just
yeah,
doesn't always look the way you want.
it's hard to see. So here's a fun thing that I've done. My daughter, I've written a couple books. My first book, which I'm really proud of, it's called "This Is Not the End," and it's the word "this," in all caps, is not the end, like on a typewriter, like the end of your story. Strategies to get you through the worst chapters of your life. But the idea is, my daughter always says, "Mom, my friends all think that this is everything, and this is the end of their lives, and I have to do chapter 6 on them all the time." When she was in college, she would tell me that. And so my chapter 6 thinking, as my daughter would call it, she's 25 now. She lives in New York. She's an AI. She did gymnastics as well. And then got too tall and became a dancer, beautiful dancer, danced with Joffrey, also very driven, disciplined, decided to be great at something else. Now she's great at AI and living the dream in New York. Anyway, she calls it my chapter 6 thinking, because the concept is when something big happens to us, it depends on where you put it on your timeline, if your lifetime timeline, to be able to see how it really feels. So do this with me, Rebecca. Remember summertime when you were 10 years old? Do you remember? I lived in Florida. I was riding bikes in the street, besides being in the gym, obviously. But it was, even gym was fun in the summers, like that long stretch of like long workouts and sweaty and jump in a pool and go back. Summertime when you
Yep.
were 10. You got it?
Yep. Yep.
Sometimes you'd have to wait a few weeks to go to camp. Like it was, kickball. And it was just a time to do puzzles with your friends. You just had time. Yeah. Got it in your head? Summertime when you're 10. Now think about summertime when you're 40. And how does that feel?
Oh my gosh, the color-coded calendar, the multiple drop-offs of the multiple camps. I mean, it's like my mind is spinning, like gonna get ready to travel for work. And it's like, let's just get through these 5 minutes, Rebecca. We can do it. We can do
Yeah,
it.
it is. It goes by so fast too. I mean, the kids come home and dump their backpacks, and then the next thing you know, you're buying back to school supplies. Like I remember, and for me, that was like dump the backpacks. And I have 3 children, really close in age, and so the back to school shopping would come, and I'm like digging their backpacks out of a closet, and there's like a moldy half-eaten peanut butter and jelly and a Ziploc in there because I never even unpacked them from getting into the last year. Like it goes by in a minute, seems like life is just moving so fast. So when you are 10 years old, that year of your life, when you're 10, is 1/10 of everything your whole life experience. So it's a 1/10 of everything. If it was a pie, you'd get 1/10. And when you're 40, that year of your life is 1/40th of your whole life experience. It's a tiny sliver of pie, but that's the same 365 days. 1/10 for a 10-year-old, 1/40th for a 40-year-old parenting a 10-year-old. So it's a very different feeling. Every day of our lives is a smaller part of the whole. So of course it feels like time's going faster. Every day of your life's a smaller part of the whole. So when you think of it that way, and I do the math in this chapter 6 thinking, when I lost my sport, okay, I'm 19, I'm at LSU, I blow out my knee, and I think my life is over. I'm 19. I just feel like I've known gymnastics most of my life. It is a little more than 75% of what I've known in life has been in a gym. So 75%. Of course, it feels like my life is over. Of course, it feels like it's everything. That is a very true, real feeling. It feels like everything. But when I turned 50, many years later, and my kids left for college, gymnastics was only 25% of my life. And all those years on television was a big chunk. And all those years in tech was a big chunk. And those 20 something years parenting kids at home was a much bigger chunk than gymnastics ever was. So now it's only 28% of my life. And if I live to be 100, which between you and me and everybody listening, I need to drink less wine, take better care of myself. But if I live to be 100, then it's less, it's 15% less than. So it changes. Of course, it feels like everything when it's a big part of what you've experienced so far. So I ask people, draw that timeline across a piece of paper from 0 to 100 and put a dot on it. You are right there, wherever you are in your timeline. If you're a kid listening, you are 14, 15, wherever you are, put a dot there. Look at all that empty timeline out ahead of you. That is empty space. That who knows what could happen? Magical, really cool things. I never could have imagined all the things that I've done in my life. I've ridden an elephant. I've flown through hurricanes. I've interviewed presidents. I've had kids and watched them do amazing things, all the things. Now, even if you're a parent listening, if you're a 38-year-old parent listening, put your dot on that piece of, on that line somewhere. You put that dot there at 38 and look at all that blank space ahead. So much more to come. So the reason that's so important is because if you're going through a tough time, you can kind of look at those years, and a tough time does not last forever. You know that it's a chapter of your life. It's a tough chapter. all that blank space ahead. And when you don't hit that one goal or you have that one big failure, you get to decide what to do with all those blank space ahead. You get to decide, are you going to be something else in the future? Are you going to go after this thing again? It's up to you. It's your life. No one's living it but you, not your parents, not your spouse. You are in control of it. So that's one way to think of it. But it's not easy. I'm not saying that's an easy way to do it, but to look at all that space ahead and to know that just this moment or this failure, this momentary failure, it's just a bad chapter in a big, long life story. And a bad day doesn't make a bad month. A bad month doesn't make a bad year. A bad couple of years doesn't make a bad life. So if you're injured, and I had plenty of injuries and casts and you name it, seasons that I sat out almost a whole season when I was a gymnast, it is a part of the big picture. It's a small part of the big picture, but it's not everything.
Yeah, my husband went through a really rough patch a couple years ago, lost his dad, lost his business. It was just like everything painful, like emotionally, financially, spiritually. I mean, it was just like the depths of pain. And a friend of his, he calls them his caveman coworkers. You know, he just was like, man, you're going to look back on this in a year or so and be like, whoa, that was crazy.
Mhm.
And he's like, that guy, like the wisdom of that caveman in that moment to just say, like, whoa, that was crazy. And it's true. Here we are 2 years later, and he's so happy and has
Right.
found a new business and a new, just like a new purpose, even in having lost his dad. He's like, I want to be with my kids. It's like the
Mhm.
lessons learned from losing his dad young and suddenly. He's like, okay, I'm living this life. And man, that was crazy. Like, we
Mhm.
all are gonna have that moment where we look back and go, "Whew, that was crazy." You know, like, you
Yeah,
had a very tragic moment in your life as a young mom, and,
I
I mean, I
did.
can't even imagine. So I don't know if you wanna tell the story or I.
Well, sometimes it's a little triggery for parents, so I don't tell the whole story. I've written a whole book on it. You're welcome to go grab that. This is not the end. But I was involved in a really horrific accident, a very public accident. And it took me from reporting the headlines to being in the headlines. And I went through a period where I didn't want to go on. I just didn't want that timeline to go on. I thought, I'm just checking out. I can't do this anymore. I can't imagine ever being happy again. I can't imagine, like, I don't even want this to be part of my life and part of my story. I didn't want that to be part of my story. I didn't want not making the Olympic team to be part of my story. I didn't want blowing out my knee to be part of my story. I've been divorced like you. I didn't want that to be part of my story. I've been fired before. I didn't want that to be part of my story. But this one was one that was just too big and too much for me to handle. And I did not want to go on. So I went through a really dark time. I was a very popular news anchor, and I was off the air for a few weeks after this accident. And then I had to go back on the air. And I can remember standing in front of the mirror with a razor in my hand, thinking, what if I just slice up my face? Then I won't be pretty and they won't want me back on. And then thinking, I could just be done. Like, I could just be over with this. And the reason I share this is because that's frightening for me now, obviously. I didn't. I put down the razor. I called my therapist. I got help, all the things that you should do in those situations. Don't go it alone. I'm a big fan of therapy and pulling in your people. That's part of what my framework that I offer folks. Um, but I could have, I can't imagine now all of these, 30 years later, not 30 years later, but it's been almost 20 years. It's 19 years. I can't imagine not having seen my kids grow up and go to high school and college and be there for them. And and jumping into tech and having all that great success in tech, that would not be part of my story. And I say this because as you mentioned, you're 2 years out from that. 5 years out, I always I use the 5 year phrase. 5 years from now, whatever you're going through is not going to feel like it does right now. You just got to keep going. You just got to keep going through, and that's what I offer. I offer a framework to keep going through. So, resilience is very different. The concept of that word is really near and dear to my heart because there's persistence, which is go at it every day, which gymnasts know well. But resilience is the definition is to adapt in a positive way to whatever happens in your life. And it's that adapt piece. So if you survive something, you survive it and you get to the other side of it. That doesn't make you resilient. Resilience is all the stuff that happens after that, and taking what you learn, adapting to that, whatever you survived. Survive it's just survive it. You see some people who just are stuck in high school, stuck in a divorce, stuck in a spot. They survived it. They just survived it. Being resilient is adapting in a positive way to whatever happens in your life and moving forward. So that adapting thing is so key. And my son, it's not exactly the same as gymnastics, but very similar. And we all have children who do different sports. So my son played baseball. His dad was a baseball player for LSU and then paid for the Expos and for the Phillies. So he had two like super jock parents and came out as a little super jock. And he trained and did baseball. Like I think the second day we brought him home from the hospital, my husband was throwing little Nerf balls at him, seeing if he'd catch. Like whole lifetime.
And
That
you're
was
like, point your toes, kid, point your toes.
yeah. He did do gymnastics. He's 27. He can still do a standing back tech.
Love it.
But he did baseball for all of those years, all that travel ball, all those, weekends away in crappy hotels. We did it all. And then he had all the colleges looking at him, just like young gymnasts do. And then he blew out his elbow at his senior year of high school, and all the colleges stopped talking to him. And I can remember his sweet little face, curled up on the porch swing on the back porch with his arm all in ice and just saying, "Oh, my life is over. I've wasted all my life in this dugout. Everything's ruined." That fatal language that we use when we self-sabotage. And he was in such a sad place. Now, as a parent, I couldn't go, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, blah, blah." That was not the place for it. I just hugged on him and told him he was good. I did say, "You're going to be okay," but I didn't explain why. I just said, "You're going to be okay, baby. And this super sucks. And I'm so sorry," and sat with him and was sad with him. And I'm like, "You're allowed to be really sad. This is such a bummer." It is. We sat in that space for a while, but in the back of my mind, I knew, like, he'll either come back from this and do some more baseball, or he'll choose something else to be great at. I knew he would. And I knew he's like, "I'm never going to be happy again." I knew he would be happy again. And I knew he would choose something else to be great at. And it's really cool to see now. So he did try to come back to baseball. He played some D3 ball in college, some junior college ball down in Florida, and tried to get seen. And then he popped that elbow again, and that was the end of it. And when he did that second time, he called me and goes, "Guess I'm choosing something else to be great at." So he is now his fourth year of med school. He's going to be a neurologist. Like, who knew that discipline and all of the things that he learned in sports, he could carry over into anything else? I said, choose something else to fall in love with and go do it. And he loves med school. He loves being a doctor. It's just fascinating to see. And he's married to a beautiful girl, like all the things. Like he couldn't imagine ever being happy again. He couldn't be happier right now. And, as a parent, that's all you want for your kids. But
Absolutely.
for the 12-year-old that you mentioned, or for the parent who's listening, you gotta sit with them and let them be sad. And I'm a big fan of let your kids fail. They have to fail in order to get up again. But gymnastics in general, since that's this podcast and your audience, teaches you so much more than what you're learning in the gym.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I'm imagining his timeline with like the little red dot and then the green dots and then the blue. It's like it all just is this beautiful tapestry over time that you can grow into whatever you want. It makes me think about when I was coaching gymnastics, and I would always get so sad when some kid who was really, just a really fun kid to coach would be switching sports. We're like, no, no, they're going to be so good at that. Dang it. Like gymnasts are good at everything. It's sort of like, yeah, of course you can go be amazing at swimming or volleyball or whatever. But it's not just that you have the ability to move your body in a certain way. It's that focus, it's that discipline, it's that desire to be great. I mean, but then there's the kind of the negative side of that perfectionism, and that always driving for more. So it can be hard to balance that. Like, is it okay if I don't get into my dream school and I don't become a neurologist? Like, can I still be happy? That's
Yeah.
kind of like, I think the underlying thing, that you're on this journey and you're in it in this moment. And that journey is going to have sad moments with mom on the bench. And there's going to be moments with, getting married and graduating. But, in your experience, how do you embrace the what is when it isn't sparkly yet?
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the not sparkly. I truly believe the parts of the non-sparkly parts are what make you who you are. And you are on a journey, and it is your journey, and you will have non-sparkly parts to it. That's how it works. And you get to decide what you do next when something happens. So think about that timeline I had you draw in your head, and you put your dot on there somewhere. I'm 57, mine's way over there. And I did there is that drive. Okay. So like to part of your question, there is that drive. So after college, I did some bodybuilding, and in my 20s, I was busy, doing news, but I was always working out and teaching aerobics and stuff during that time. And then I did triathlons in my 40s, and even in my 50s, I do distance cycling. Like, you're always going to want to challenge yourself and see how far you can go, because you're wired like that. So if you think this is going to go away, this need to be great, it doesn't. I think that's part of being a gymnast. But the biggest, most important part of that, and listen, if you're listening to me, you decide what success looks like. Yes, my son's going into med school, but at one point he wanted to be a high school teacher and open a gym. And I was like, yes, go be great at that. Like, I don't care what my kids do. I just want them to go be great at whatever they do and be happy at it. So you decide what success looks like for you, not anybody else. He's got a little bit of his mama in him and is a little too high strung and can't let his foot off the brake, but that's not always a good thing. But back to that moment of, what do you do in those, what I call what if, what now moments? Now what? So if you draw your timeline, and you can put it on a piece of paper, you put what I call your resume. You won the state championship, you got this, you graduated, all the stuff is across the top. For the parents listening, that's you got the job, you got married, you did the thing, like all the good stuff's across the top of that line. And then you go below the line and you put in all the stuff you've gotten through. And that's, maybe you were bullied, maybe you broke an ankle in the, at season of level 6, whatever. You put those at the bottom of your resume, of your at the below the line resume, good stuff on top, and all the stuff you've overcome at the bottom. When I talk to parents, this could be parenting a child with special needs, or losing a parent or a loved one. Like, and like your husband, like he had 3 downs, like tough ones. I had 3 downs in my 30s. I got let go in a big budget cut from being a very popular news anchor to, hey, we got to let you go. I got a divorce in my 30s. It was like in a matter of 2 years. Got let go. I got a divorce, and then my dog died. I said my life became a country song. Like, my dog died. Like, it's just bad. So those bottom things, all the tough stuff you've been through, goes underneath that line. And I call that your reverse resume. And those non-sparkly things, as you put them, I'm going to steal that term. I like it a lot. All the non-sparkly things down at the bottom, that's what makes you who you are. That's where you figure out how you get, what kind of person you're going to be. And I heard this recently, and I'm big into this phrase now. It's not what you're doing in life, it's who you're being in life. Don't go out and do things, go be somebody. People say, what do you do for a living? Or what do you do? That's different than who you're being. Who do you want to be? What does success look like if you're just being? And success looks different for everybody. So in those non-sparkly moments, I have a 4-part structure that people can go through. I call it your tips. People are always asking me for tips. And do you want me to go into the whole thing now?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Give us the Reader's Digest version.
Okay.
The
Reader's
tips.
Digest version. So this is whatever you're going through. So I call it this framework because it's your this. I don't know what you're going through. It's different for you than it is for me. But whatever this is that you're going through, you take this that's taking up all the space in your brain. You wake up thinking about it. You go to bed thinking about it. It's taking up a lot of time and energy from your brain. You take that and you shrink it down. And the first part of the tips is T. Put it in your timeline. Put it in that timeline. Put a dot there and figure out where it fits in. Got it? It's not your whole world, your big, giant, marvelous, messy life. It's not. It's just this part right here. It's a dot. And then for both visual learners, now you've got your dot on your timeline. Now draw a line on each side of it. And the second part of tips, TI, is isolate. So put a line on both sides of it and isolate that. You can't talk about what happened before it or what happens after it. None of this woulda, shoulda, coulda, wish I'd have done it. I hate this sport. I should have gotten a different sport. I wish I married a different guy. I wish I'd have done something. None of that. You can't go to the back, and you can't go, to the what ifs and the doomsday scenarios you're playing out in the future. Any good therapist will tell you if you're living in the woulda, shoulda, couldas, and that's where depression lives. And if you're living in the other side with the what ifs, the future part, that's where anxiety lives. So you're in this magic moment. That's where you draw these lines in this magic moment, and you can figure out by looking at it exactly what it is. So if you think about a glass that's half full or half empty, what would you say if I showed you a glass with some water in it? What would you say?
I'm a half full girl. I'd say half full.
See, I'm half full girl too. See, we got that in common too. We want to be that person, right? We all want to be that person. So if I show you this glass in the isolate part, it's neither. It is a 6-ounce glass with 3 ounces of water. That's it. You take all the emotion out of it and go, what am I actually dealing with right now? Not all the sadness because I spent so much time in this, or this anxiety and sadness about the future because it might not work out, but what am I actually dealing with? That's the isolate piece. And then TIP is people, who you draw a circle around that dot and you go, okay, who's in this with me? Because when something happens, we feel like we're all alone in that when, it's all us. You feel very alone if you blow out your knee. You do an ACL tear and a meet, like you're going to feel all alone. Like no one has ever felt like this before because only you know how hard you've worked and only you know what your dreams were, before this. And those dreams haven't gone away yet. They're still very fresh in your mind. So you're this, whatever this is. You may feel alone in it, but you draw your circle around it and you go, okay, you're not alone. People who have success, athletes have coaches, CEOs call each other for advice, big executives and people who've made millions of dollars did not get there alone. So you're in this circle and you go, who do I need to pull into my circle with me to help? And then maybe you look at your circle and go, okay, maybe there's some people in my circle I don't need in here. So you take your people and you put them in 2 columns, who's helping and who's hurting. And you figure that part out. And that's the P, that's your people. And then the S is the story. And that is the language in your head. And so you write at the bottom of that piece of paper, this is blank. And you have to label it. And you can't use any self-sabotaging language. And that's why you can't be overgeneralized. This always happens to me. This is the way things always go for me. You can't catastrophize and say, this is ruined. This is terrible. This is never going to work. You can't use that language. You can't jump to conclusions and say, this is because of this or that. You can't go there or exaggerate. I've got 8 million things to do to get past this thing. None of that. And of course, you can't belabor. That's the other piece of self-sabotage that we do when we go, if only, if only, if only. So this is what? This is a new challenge. This is a crappy thing that happened to me. This is an unfortunate accident. This is a terrible time in my life. That can be a thing, as long as it's an is and it just is factual what you're going through. So by putting it that way and doing all of these things, then you can start to build a path forward. And when you look at it that way, it doesn't hurt so much. You can see the perspective. You can see what you have to work with. You can find help. And you can change the language in your head, because the language in your head comes out of your mouth and that becomes your story.
Amazing. I mean, so helpful. And it's also the underpinning of self-compassion is just acknowledging this is hard. Just that, and that's a fact in those moments that I think a lot of athletes are like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Just to be able to go, this is hard. This
Yeah.
feels really hard right now, and I need help. And I'm going to let people help me. That's so important to be able to go, actually, I need help, coach, instead of I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. You can't bounce back by yourself, isolated, with your story. You just stay stuck.
And I always say it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. But it is absolutely okay to be okay. To not be okay. It's okay to not be all right. It's okay to ask for help. And that's really hard for us as athletes because I'm horrible at asking for help.
I
Always
got
have
this. I'm
been.
fine.
Yeah. I never even won a spot. I'm like, okay, now I just broke something. Like that was stupid. I should have gotten a spot. But the 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 concept, it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. Give yourself some grace. Be not okay. And everybody comes back from things at their own rate. Just because somebody else like got the twisties and got back doesn't mean you're going to be, oh, she was back in 3 weeks. No, that may not be the case. Or just because somebody else, broke something and came back or had a death in the family and then came back. The way people cope the not okay times is all, it's all very individual. So you got to give yourself some grace to not be okay and ask for help. But then I'll tell you, to be resilient, that's you survived it. That's just survival, is just getting through. But to be resilient is the not staying that way. It's not okay to stay not okay. You have to take some action to move your story forward and choose something else to be great at, or make it magical, or come back, make your comeback. When I got let go from news, I won Charleston's favorite news anchor for the 7th year in a row on a Thursday. And then on Friday, the GM called me in and he said, "Hey, can we see you for a minute?" I thought he was going to like maybe give me a bonus, or at least a
Black at
congratulations.
least.
Right. Something. And a plaque. Yeah, that'd be good. No, they sat me down and a little woman from HR came in and they said, "We are, per your contract, we are releasing you without cause." And I was devastated, very public, let go. National budget cuts, the whole, all of their TV stations, but it felt very personal at the time, but devastated. And I had to decide, do I want to go back and do news? Do I want to make a comeback at this? Or am I ready to go do something else? What do I want to be great at next? And at that time, I decided I wanted to come back and do news. And so I buckled down and did all I could. I got into another TV station, and that next TV station, some of you athletes are coming back from injuries or whatever. So I did that a few times in gymnastics too. But at that next TV station, I won Best Newscaster in the Southeast. And don't you doubt for a minute that that wasn't a poke at my old TV station. But I worked so hard because I'm like, I will show them, dang it. They should not have done this. So you decide what you want your story to be.
Amazing. Oh, Nina Sossamon Pogue, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your story. I'm really grateful that you've been here with us today. If anyone wants to reach out and book you for their keynote or ask you questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for having me. I know it's a little different than your normal guests, so I appreciate you having me on. I hope I shared some wisdom for your listeners. You can find me I'm on social media everywhere. There aren't any other Nina Sossamon Pogues. However, there are quite a few speakers named Nina. There's several others, and they're all fabulous, by the way. I've never met a Nina speaker I didn't like. But I'm under Nina Speaks on Instagram. Is a great way to follow me. I'd appreciate follows. So it's Nina underscore SP, as in Sossamon Pogue, and then the dot, and then EAKS. So it's Nina Speaks, but I broke it up. We thought that'd be really clever when we came up with it, but it's a horrible thing to have to share on a podcast. But you can find me on Nina Speaks on Instagram or on LinkedIn if you're interested in hiring me to speak at a corporate event. It's not exactly what I talked about here, but I have some really strong corporate keynotes. But I just hope I've put a few nuggets of wisdom in and help anyone out there who's struggling get through a tough time, because it's okay to not be okay, but just keep going. It gets better. I would have never imagined my life would turn out how it has so far. And even today, when I'm in a tough spot, Rebecca, I will tell you, I will look at that timeline and go, look at all that space ahead. Who knows what's going to happen there?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.